This happened 3 years ago during the worst move of my life, and I've never talked about it until now. I had just turned 31. I had about $800 to my name, and I was driving across the country alone with everything that I owned crammed into the back of my car. Clothes, books, old hard drives, 2 boxes full of kitchen stuff I probably should have thrown away, a laundry basket full of shoes, and a plastic storage bin full of things I thought were too important to pack with everything else. My birth certificate, my passport, my dad's old watch, things like that. I was moving from Oregon to Pennsylvania for a job I wasn't even sure I wanted, but it came with health insurance and a salary that felt, at least at the time, like a rescue boat. The problem was getting there. Gas was expensive, food was expensive. Every hotel along the route seemed to be either too expensive or visibly unsafe from the parking lot. I had mapped out the drive carefully, trying to break it into chunks that I could survive, and on the second night, I decided to camp. I'd camped plenty of times before. Not a lot, but enough that I knew how to set up a tent, start a fire, and sleep with one eye open. I had a little 2-person tent, a sleeping bag, a headlamp, a pocket knife, and a can of bear spray my friend had insisted I take with me. The campground I picked was in Idaho, somewhere off a rural highway about 20 minutes past the last real town. Online, it looked normal, cheap, basic, first come, first served. There were photos of families by a lake, kids riding bikes, dogs on leashes, old RVs, pine trees, picnic tables. It looked safe in the way campgrounds usually look safe. I got there just before sunset. That was my first mistake. The road into the campground was longer than I expected. It started paved, then turned into gravel, then narrowed between trees so thick they blocked out most of the sky. I remember checking my phone and seeing I had 1 bar, then no bars, then 1 bar again. When I reached the entrance, there was a wooden sign with the campground name on it, but the paint was peeling so badly I could barely read it. There was a pay box, a bulletin board with a faded map, and a little handwritten note taped under the glass that said, "No host on duty." That bothered me a little bit, but not enough to leave. I was tired in a way that made me stupid. I drove slowly through the campground looking for a spot, and it was empty. Completely empty. No families, no kids, no dogs, no RVs, no smoke from the campfires, just rows of vacant sites, each with a picnic table, a fire ring, and a little post with a number on it. I almost turned around right then. I remember actually slowing down near the exit road and thinking, this is weird. This is too weird. But then I told myself I was being dramatic. It was a weekday. It was late in the season. Maybe everyone had gone home. Maybe the online photos were from summer. Maybe I was lucky and had the whole place to myself. Then I saw the old man. He was sitting at campsite 14, just sitting there in a folding chair beside an unlit fire. His campsite was strange because it didn't look like a campsite at all. No tent, no RV, no cooler, no lantern, no sleeping bag, just the folding chair and a battered blue pickup truck parked crookedly beside the trees. He was wearing jeans, suspenders, and a pale yellow button-up shirt that went all the way to his throat. His hair was white and thin. He had one of those narrow, weathered faces that looks carved out of wood. As I drove past, he turned his head and watched me, not in a curious way, in a patient way, like he'd been waiting for me or something. I kept driving. I picked a site as far away from him as possible without being directly by the bathrooms because I didn't want people walking past me at night if anybody else showed up. Not that there were any people around. That was the whole problem. I chose campsite 3. I parked with my headlights facing the road, just in case I had to leave quickly. I remember thinking very clearly, face the car toward the road. The air smelled like dust and pine needles. The sun was dropping behind the trees, and everything had that golden evening glow that makes you feel like you're in a memory. I tried to focus on that instead of the old man. I set up my tent fast. Then I pulled out my little camp stove, heated up a can of soup, and ate it sitting on the picnic table with my phone in my lap, hoping for service. Nothing. No bars. I walked around the site holding my phone up like an idiot. Still nothing. The campground had gotten very quiet. Not peaceful quiet, empty quiet. There's a difference. Peaceful quiet has birds and leaves and insects. Empty quiet has the feeling of a room after someone has stopped talking. I was rinsing my spoon with a bottle of water when I heard gravel crunch behind me. I turned. The old man was standing at the edge of my campsite. I don't know how we got there without me hearing him approach sooner. There was gravel everywhere, dry leaves everywhere, twigs everywhere. But suddenly he was just there. Maybe 15 feet away, holding a bundle of firewood in both arms. He smiled, not a big smile, just enough to show me he was trying. "Evening," he said. His voice was soft, dry, almost papery. I said, "Hello." He looked at my tent, my stove, my car stuffed to the windows with all my belongings. "Moving?" he asked. I froze for half a second. It was obvious, I guess. Anyone could have figured that out. My car was packed full. There were clothes hanging from the back window, a pillow wedged against the passenger seat. Still, I didn't like that he said it. "Yup," I said. "You come a long way?" "Pretty long," I said. He nodded, like I had confirmed something. Then he stepped closer and held out the firewood. "Thought you might need this." "Oh," I said, that's okay. I'm not making a fire tonight." He looked at me kind of funny and tilted his head, and he said, "Well, you should." It's the way that he said it. It wasn't threatening exactly. It was worse than threatening. It was gentle, like he was correcting a child. I tried to smile. "I'm honestly probably just going to sleep soon, but thank you." He kept holding the wood out. I didn't know what else to do, so I took it. It was heavier than I expected, and the bark scraped at my forearms. "Thanks." He looked past me, toward my tent, then toward my car, then back at me. "You alone?" I lied automatically. "No, my boyfriend's meeting me here." The old man's smile changed. Not much, just enough. "Tonight?" he asked. "Uh-huh. What time?" I felt my stomach drop. I gave a little laugh, like the question was normal. "Soon." He nodded again, licked his lips. Then he looked toward the road, the way I had come in. "That's a long road in," he said. I didn't know what to say. "Yeah." "Easy to miss the turn after dark." I didn't answer him. He stood there for another few seconds. Then he said, "Well, you holler if you need anything." I said, "I will. Thank you." He turned and walked away. I watched him go. This time I heard the gravel under his boots, slowly crunching steps all the way down the road. I waited until he was out of sight, then immediately carried the firewood to the edge of the site and dropped it there. For some reason, I didn't want it near my tent. I know it sounds irrational, but I just didn't. By then, the sun had almost gone. The trees had turned black at the edges, and the sky above them was still pale but fading fast. I got ready for bed as quickly as I could. I brushed my teeth beside the car. I changed into sweatpants inside the tent. I put my keys, phone, pocket knife, and bear spray inside the little mesh pocket by my head. Before crawling into my sleeping bag, I checked the car doors, all locked. Then I checked them again, still locked. I got into the tent, zipped it up, and lay there listening. At first, there was nothing. Then a breeze moved through the pine trees. Then something small scurried through the leaves. Then, far away, I heard a truck door close. I told myself that was good. The old man was going to sleep. That meant I could sleep. But I couldn't. I lay there awake for what felt like hours, staring at the dark tent ceiling, watching shadows move across the nylon whenever the wind stirred the trees. But every few minutes, I reached up and touched the bear spray to make sure it was still there. At some point, I must have drifted off, because the next thing I remember is waking up to a sound, and it wasn't a loud sound. It was small, like a soft metallic clink. I opened my eyes. For a second, I didn't know where I was. Then I remembered the campground, the move, the old man, the empty sights. I held my breath. The sound came again. Clink. It was just outside the tent, near the picnic table. I sat up very slowly. The tent was completely dark except for a faint grayness at the seams where the moonlight leaked through. I reached into the mesh pocket and wrapped my hand around the bear spray. Clink, then a scrape, like something being dragged across wood. I almost called out. I'm so glad I didn't. Instead, I turned my phone on and checked the time. 1:47 a.m. No service. Of course. I sat there for maybe 2 full minutes, barely breathing. Then I heard footsteps. Slow, heavy, not animal steps, human steps. They moved from the picnic table toward the front of my tent, then stopped. Right outside the zipper, I could see a shape through the nylon. Not clearly, just a darker patch against the dark. Someone was standing there. I stared at it, frozen. The shape didn't move. I could hear breathing. Very faintly, in and out, in and out. I gripped the bear spray so hard my hands started to cramp. Then a voice whispered, "You awake?" It was the old man. I didn't move, I didn't answer. The shape leaned closer. The nylon pressed inward slightly like he had put his hand against the tent. "You awake in there?" I still didn't answer. A long pause, then he chuckled quietly, almost kindly. "Good girl," he whispered. Every part of me went cold. I heard him step back. Then the footsteps moved away, slow crunch, slow crunch, slow crunch, back toward the road. I stayed sitting up, bear spray in hand, for I don't know how long, 10 minutes, 20, maybe more. Finally, when I couldn't hear him anymore, I forced myself to unzip the tent just enough to look out. The campsite looked empty. The picnic table was a dark rectangle in the moonlight. My car was still there. The trees were still there. I almost convinced myself that I had dreamed it. Then I saw what was on the picnic table. A mug. A white ceramic mug with a blue stripe around the rim. It had not been there when I went to sleep. I know it hadn't. I crawled out of the tent with my bear spray pointed in front of me. The mug was sitting in the center of the picnic table. Inside of it was coffee, still steaming. Beside it was a folded paper napkin. On the napkin, written in shaky block letters, were the words, "For the road." I backed away so fast I nearly tripped over the fire ring. That was it. That was the moment I decided I was leaving. I didn't care that it was the middle of the night. I didn't care that I was exhausted and I could hardly see straight. I didn't care that the road was dark and I didn't know where the next gas station was. I was leaving. I grabbed my sleeping bag and shoved it into the back seat without rolling it. I threw my shoes in after it. I collapsed the tent so badly, one of the poles snapped, and I didn't even stop to care. I just balled the whole thing up and stuffed it behind the passenger seat. The entire time I kept looking toward the road. Nothing, no movement, no sound. I got in the car and I locked the doors. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped the keys between the seat and the console. I had to dig for them with one hand while holding the bear spray up with the other. Finally, I got the key into the ignition. The car started, the headlights blasted across the campsite, and the old man was standing directly in front of my car. I screamed. He was about 20 feet away, in the middle of the site road, facing me. He had no flashlight, he had no lantern, nothing. Just that pale yellow shirt buttoned all the way up to his neck, and those suspenders hanging from his shoulders. He lifted one hand, not waving, just raising it, like he wanted me to wait. I threw the car into reverse. The tires spun in the dirt, and for one horrible second, I thought I was stuck. Then the car lurched backward. I hit the brakes, shifted into drive, and jerked around him as wide as I could without hitting a tree. As I passed him, he turned his head and followed me with his eyes. He wasn't surprised. He wasn't angry. He looked calm. He looked disappointed. I sped down the campground road so fast, my packed boxes slammed into each other in the back. Branches scraped the sides of my car. Gravel sprayed underneath the tires. I kept expecting to see him in the rearview mirror somehow. I kept expecting headlights, but there was nothing behind me, just darkness. I made it to the highway and drove for almost 40 minutes before I saw another car. I didn't stop until sunrise. By then, I was in Montana, parked outside a gas station with fluorescent lights buzzing overhead and a man in a landscaping truck filling up beside me. I sat there shaking, watching normal people buy coffee and breakfast sandwiches like the world hadn't just cracked open. Eventually, I went inside. I used the bathroom. I washed my face. I bought the largest coffee they had. When I came back out, I noticed my trunk wasn't closed all the way. Wasn't open, just not latched. I stood there staring at it. I honestly wasn't sure if I had closed it properly. I slammed everything into the car and was in such a panic, but I remembered closing the trunk. I remembered hearing it latch. For a while, I couldn't make myself touch it. Then the landscaping guy glanced over at me, and that somehow made me brave enough. I set my coffee on the roof, I took out my keys, and I opened the trunk. At first, everything looked normal. Boxes, bags, the plastic storage bin with my important documents. Then I saw something wedged behind the bin. A folding chair. Brown metal frame. Faded green fabric seat. Old. Dirty. Collapsed, neatly, and tucked into the corner of my trunk like someone had placed it there with care. I didn't own a folding chair. I stood there for so long that the gas station clerk came outside and asked if I was okay. I said yes. I don't know why. I took the chair out with 2 fingers, carried it to the dumpster behind the gas station and threw it in. Then I got back into my car and drove for 14 hours. I didn't camp again. I slept in my car at truck stops with the doors locked and a tire iron under my blanket. I spent money I didn't have on cheap motels whenever I could. I cried somewhere in Ohio because I was so tired I couldn't see straight. But I made it to Pennsylvania. A few weeks later, after I had unpacked most of my things, I tried to look up the campground. I couldn't remember the exact name because the sign had been so faded, but I knew roughly where it was. I knew the highway. I knew the little town nearby. I knew the turnoff. I searched maps for almost an hour. Nothing. There were campgrounds in the area, but none that matched. No little lake, No numbered sites laid out the way that I remembered. No reviews mentioning a missing host or a blue pickup truck or a strange old man. I told myself maybe I had the wrong location, maybe I was too tired, maybe I misremembered. Then about a month after the move, I was cleaning out the car. I found old receipts under the seats. A granola bar wrapper, a pen, a bottle cap, all the normal trash that builds up during a long drive. Under the passenger seat, shoved all the way toward the back, was a folded paper napkin. I already knew what it was before I opened it. Same cheap white napkin, same shaky block letters. I opened it up. It says, "For the road." I don't know when he put it there. I don't know if I put it there. I don't know how it got into my car. I don't know how the chair got into my trunk. And I don't know why, out of all the things he could have done, he chose to leave little gifts. That might be the worst part, because threats make sense. Violence makes sense. A man standing outside your tent at 2 a.m. whispering to you makes a horrible kind of sense. But kindness felt like a trap. It stays with you. I still don't camp alone. And whenever I see an old man sitting by himself at a rest stop or outside a gas station or in a folding chair at the edge of the yard, I feel my whole body lock up before I can talk myself out of it, because some part of me is still back there, in that empty campground, in that tent, listening to him breathe outside the zipper, waiting for him to whisper my name. My boyfriend Ryan used to joke that I had an overactive imagination. If a branch snapped in the woods, I'd assume someone was watching us. If I heard footsteps outside my apartment at night, I'd check the peephole 3 times before going to bed. Ryan wasn't reckless, he just believed that there was always a logical explanation for everything. And usually, he was right. That's why what happened during our camping trip still bothers me, because even he couldn't explain it. It started as a weekend getaway. Nothing adventurous, just 2 nights in a national forest we'd both been wanting to visit. We'd packed way too much food, borrowed a friend's tent, and planned on spending most of the weekend hiking, reading, and staying away from our phones. The drive in was beautiful. Towering pines, a narrow river running alongside the road, little pockets of sunlight cutting through the trees. By the time we reached the campground, there were only a handful of occupied sites. A retired couple in an RV, a family with 2 little kids riding bikes, another tent about 100 yards away that looked empty. It felt normal, comfortably ordinary. We set up camp, made sandwiches, and decided to take one of the shorter hiking trails before sunset. We hadn't walked more than 15 minutes before Ryan stopped. "Do you smell that?" At first I thought it was just stagnant water. Then I caught it. Rocked. Not overpowering, just wrong. We followed the smell another 20 feet before I saw it. A squirrel. It was lying beside a fallen log, dead. Its body looked untouched except for its neck, which had been twisted almost completely backward. No blood, no bite marks, no missing flesh. It looked like someone had simply picked it up and broken it. Ryan crouched beside it. "Probably a coyote," he said. "But they didn't eat it." They get interrupted. He stood up and dusted off his hands. "Come on." That should have been the end of it. But it wasn't. The next morning we went farther down another trail. This time it was a rabbit. Same thing. No blood, no obvious injuries except the neck. Ryan frowned. "That's weird." A mile later we found 2 more. 1 squirrel, 1 raccoon, both dead, both untouched. Both lying out in the open like someone had carefully placed them there. By then even Ryan had stopped making jokes. "I'd never seen anything like this," he said. When we got back to the camp, I asked the campground host if there had been any reports of sick animals. He looked genuinely confused. Sick? We found a bunch of dead animals. He shrugged. That's nature. But they're not eaten. They usually are. That was the entire conversation. It felt like he wanted it to be over as quickly as possible. That evening, the family with the little kids packed up and left. It was strange because they'd really only just arrived. Ryan figured maybe one of the kids wasn't feeling well. I remember watching them drive away. The mother never looked toward our campsite. She kept staring into the trees behind it. Around sunset, something changed. The birds stopped, not gradually, all at once. 1 minute the woods were full of bird song. The next, nothing. Ryan noticed it too. That's odd. We stood there, listening. No wind, no insects, no birds, just silence. I've spent enough time outdoors to know forests are never truly quiet. There's always something moving, always something calling. That evening there was nothing. Dinner felt uncomfortable. We kept talking louder than usual, almost like we were trying to fill the silence ourselves. Every little sound carried. The scrape of a fork, the zipper of a backpack, the hiss of our camp stove. After dark, we built a small fire. Not because we needed it, because sitting in complete darkness suddenly felt like a terrible idea. Around 10, we climbed into the tent. Ryan fell asleep almost immediately, as he always does. I didn't. Every few minutes, I'd hear something. Leaves shifting. A twig snapping, then nothing. Around midnight, I finally started drifting off. That's when I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate. Not the quick rustling of a deer, not the cautious shuffle of a raccoon. Heavy. One step, pause. Another step, pause. They circled the campsite once, then stopped. I reached over and nudged Ryan awake. He listened. There, I whispered. He heard it too. The footsteps started again. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Ryan unzipped the tent just enough to peek outside. I don't see anything. The footsteps continued, closer now, but they weren't coming from one direction anymore. They seemed to move without moving, like the sound itself was shifting through the trees. Ryan grabbed a flashlight. He stepped outside while I stayed in the tent. He swept the beam across the campsite. Picnic table, fire ring, our car. Nothing. Then the trees. Nothing. He lowered the flashlight. Probably a deer. Before I could answer, crunch. Directly behind us. Ryan spun around so quickly the flashlight slipped from his hands and hit the ground. The beam landed sideways, pointing into the forest. Between two trees, someone was standing there. At least that's what I thought. It was too far away to really see clearly, maybe 60 feet, tall. Really tall, taller than Ryan. Perfectly still. The flashlight beam only reached its outline. It had long arms, narrow shoulders, the head tilted slightly to one side. Ryan whispered, "What the?" Neither of us moved. I wanted Ryan to shine the flashlight directly at it. The beam shifted for less than a second, and then, when it came back, the space between the trees was empty. It was simply gone. Neither of us spoke. Ryan slowly backed toward the tent. "Get inside." What was that? I don't know. That answer terrified me more than anything because Ryan always knew. Or at least he acted like he did. We zipped up the tent. Neither of us slept. Around 2 a.m, we heard something dragging across the ground. It wasn't walking, it was dragging, like a heavy branch being pulled over pine needles. It circled the campsite once, twice, then stopped beside the car. The driver's side handle rattled. Just once, a small metallic click. Ryan grabbed the bear spray. We listened. Nothing. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Finally, sometime before dawn, exhaustion finally won. I must have fallen asleep. Ryan shook me awake just after sunrise. We're leaving. His voice sounded wrong, flat. He pointed toward the edge of the campsite. There, beside the picnic table, lay another dead animal. This time it was a fox. Its neck had been completely twisted around. No blood, no bite marks, no missing flesh, just placed there, like a message, like an omen. Ryan didn't even make coffee. We threw everything in the car exactly the way that it was. Sleeping bags halfway folded. The tent was covered in water, damp from the overnight. Chairs were still dirty. Neither of us said much as we drove toward the campground exit. About half a mile down the road, Ryan slammed on the brakes. Standing in the middle of the road was a deer. It wasn't moving, it wasn't eating. It wasn't even looking at us. It was staring into the woods. Its ears were pinned back. Every muscle in its body looked tense. Ryan honked. Nothing. The deer didn't react. Then, without warning, it bolted sideways into the trees. Not away from us, toward whatever it had been watching. Ryan whispered, "No." I looked where the deer had disappeared. For just a second, I saw a figure, not clearly, just enough. Too tall, standing perfectly still between the trunks, watching the road, watching us. Ryan hit the gas. Neither of us looked back. About 20 minutes later, we stopped at a diner for breakfast. We barely touched our food. Ryan finally said, "I'm not telling anybody about that." Why? Because I don't want to sound insane. A week later, I called the ranger station anyway. I asked if there had been any kind of predator activity in the area. The ranger was polite. He said they had black bears, mountain lions, coyotes, the usual. Then I asked him something I'd almost talked myself out of asking. Have people ever reported finding dead animals with broken necks? There was a long pause. Finally, he asked, "What campground were you staying at?" I told him. Another pause. Then he said, "I'll never forget. We usually recommend people don't hike there after dark." Why? We've had unusual reports. What kind of reports? I'm sorry. His voice became noticeably more careful. I can't really discuss visitor complaints. Before I could ask another question, he wished me a nice day and hung up. Ryan still refuses to talk about that trip. If I bring it up, he changes the subject. He says we probably just saw a person. He says predators sometimes leave kills. He says exhaustion can make ordinary things seem extraordinary, and maybe he's right, maybe. But every now and then, usually late at night, I'll remember the way the woods was silent, not quieter, but silent, as if every living thing knew something was walking between those trees. And the only safe thing to do was to stop making noise. I've spent the last 4 years trying to come up with a rational explanation for what happened to my friend Kendra and me at Crater Lake National Park. I can't. I've gone through every possibility: altitude, exhaustion, dehydration, coincidence, even carbon monoxide from the camp stove, even though we barely used it. Nothing explains all of it. Before I tell you what happened, you should understand why Crater Lake feels different from almost anywhere else. If you've never been there, it isn't just another mountain lake. The lake sits inside the collapsed crater of Mount Mazama, a volcano that erupted roughly 7,700 years ago. The mountain literally blew itself apart, leaving behind a caldera that slowly filled with rain and snow melt over thousands of years. The water is unbelievably blue because it's incredibly pure. There aren't rivers flowing into it. It almost feels too perfect, like someone carved a giant hole into the earth and filled it with glass. When you're standing on the rim, it doesn't feel like you're looking at a lake. I'd just finalized my divorce a month earlier, and Kendra convinced me We needed to celebrate by doing something we'd always talked about for years. Freedom hike, she called it. Neither of us were beginners. We'd backpacked all over Oregon and Washington. We knew how to read maps, filter water, handle wildlife, and stay calm when things went sideways. We were prepared. The first strange thing happened before the sun even went down. We'd planned a 12-mile hike before settling into our campground. According to our watches, we started just after 9 in the morning. We stopped several times for photos. We filtered water. We ate lunch. Nothing felt rushed. When we got back to the trailhead, Kendra looked at her watch. 11:38. I laughed. No. She turned it toward me. It said 11:38. Barely 2.5 hours. 12 miles? Neither of us was even breathing hard. We both checked our phones. Same time. The GPS track showed we completed the entire route. At first, we thought maybe the distance marker online had been wrong. Then we talked to another couple in the parking lot. They'd done the exact same trail. It took us almost 6 hours, the husband said. I remember looking at Kendra. Neither of us said anything because we both knew exactly how long we'd been walking. Or at least we thought we did. That night, the campground was busy. Families, campfires, kids roasting marshmallows, people laughing, having a good time. It wasn't isolated at all, which somehow makes what happened later even harder to explain. After dinner, we set up my camera to do a time-lapse of the stars. Crater Lake is one of the darkest places I've ever been. Once the last campfires died down, the sky almost stopped looking real. The Milky Way stretched from one horizon to another. Around 10:30, Kendra pointed upward. Did you see that? Something had crossed the sky. It moved in a perfectly straight line, like a laser beam. Then it stopped. Then it slowed down, and then it stopped again. I actually laughed. What am I looking at? Neither of us spoke after that, because the light, it didn't blink. It didn't move. It simply hung there. Then it changed direction without making an arc. It was suddenly somewhere else, like someone had skipped a few frames in reality. I remember standing up. The campground was completely silent. Not quiet, silent. No wind, no insects, no people talking. Even the trees looked frozen. Kendra whispered, "Do you hear that?" "I don't hear anything." "No," she said. "I mean exactly that." I realized what she meant. Silence has texture. This was not silence, it was absence. Then everything became strangely illuminated. It's so hard to describe. It was like my body still had weight, but it felt optional. Every step took almost no effort. The air felt thicker than normal, but somehow easier to move through. Imagine walking underwater without getting wet. Or walking in a dream where gravity only half works. I looked toward the neighboring campsites. Everyone was still there, or at least it looked like they were there. But nobody moved. Not one person. The flames from nearby campfires weren't flickering the way that they were before. They almost looked frozen, not extinguished. Paused? Kendra reached toward one of the picnic tables. Her hand stopped an inch above it. She looked at me with the strangest expression. "It feels farther away than it looks." I walked over. She was right. It took me several steps to cover what should have been maybe 2 feet. Distance no longer matched movement. It felt like space had stretched, not visually, physically. The stars overhead seemed lower, close enough that I caught myself reaching upward. Neither of us panicked. That's the part that bothers me the most. We should have panicked. Instead, everything felt perfectly normal, like our brains had decided this was exactly how the world had always worked. I remember telling Kendra, completely calmly, "I think we're somewhere else." She nodded. "I know." Not, "What do you mean?" Not, "Don't be ridiculous." Just, "I know." Time stopped meaning anything. I don't know whether we stood there for 30 seconds or for 3 hours. I remember walking across the campground, except it wasn't really walking. It felt more like drifting, floating even. One step carried me much farther than it should have. The next step barely moved me at all. The air shimmered around every tree like heat rising from asphalt. Only it was 45 degrees outside. Then I noticed something else. The stars, they weren't moving. The Earth should have been rotating. Time-lapse photography should have captured streaks. Everything overhead remained perfectly still, like someone had pressed pause on the sky. The bright object we'd seen earlier was gone, or maybe it had never been there. I honestly don't know. The next thing I remember is sunlight, birds, people making coffee, bustling about, someone laughing 2 campsites over. I was sitting in my camp chair with my boots still on. Kendra was asleep against the picnic table. My battery in my camera was dead. The memory card contained almost 800 photographs. Every single image was identical. The stars hadn't moved, not one fraction of an inch. It looked like the exact same frame copied hundreds of times. The timestamps covered nearly 7 hours. Neither of us remembered any of them. When Kendra woke up, the first thing she said was, "My ears hurt." Mine did too. Behind my right ear, near the hairline, were 3 tiny red marks, almost perfectly spaced. Not scratches, not bug bites, like tiny little pinpoints. Kendra had nearly identical marks behind her left ear. Mirror images. We photographed them. By that evening, they had almost disappeared. Within 2 days, they were gone completely. We drove home without really talking about it. Over the next few weeks, we compared memories. Every detail matched. The frozen campfires, the strange gravity, the silence. The feeling that distance had stopped behaving correctly. Even the sentence I'd spoken, "I think we're somewhere else." She remembered it word for word. We've never gone back to Crater Lake. I still love that place. It's one of the most beautiful places I've ever witnessed. But sometimes I wonder if, for a few hours that night, we weren't standing inside of a campground at all. Maybe we were standing in the exact same place, just somewhere our world occasionally overlaps with something we aren't supposed to see. And if it hadn't have been for those identical marks behind our ears, I think I would have convinced myself that it was all just a dream.